Greetings! Welcome to the devlog for update 72 of Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades. We're going to start off as always with a quick sound check. Make sure speakers aren't up too high. Wonderful. So what have we got for you this week? Well, we've got a bunch of things for this update proper, but we're also going to be talking about the index controllers and the specific implementation for them for H3. But before we get into all of that, we've got a very special toy that I know a lot of you have been wanting for a long time, and I decided now was the perfect time, especially those of you who've been following along with me during this extended alpha period, have been super patient and helpful. I've got something very special for you. That's right, finally we have the M60, the pig, the one and only. Absolutely beastly. We've got a 100 round belt box for it. Clip that on, pull our bolt back, pull our top cover up. Wonderful. Clamp that down, take us off a safe. We should be ready to go. We'll fire this the correct way, which is from the hip. Wonderful. Maybe pop out that bipod for a second. Crouch down. Oh, wonderful. Just a beautiful piece. Thanks again to Ben Kalla for it. Absolutely gorgeous. Feels absolutely massive in VR. Let's pull that up there. Let's just dump a few more rounds out of it. What's great is that the cyclic rate on the M60 is not very high. It's only about, I think for this implementation of it's about sitting at about 550, which means that the recoil doesn't go completely out of control. It makes a fantastic walking fire machine gun, which actually will make it go perfectly with some additions that are coming in this update to our Locomotion systems. I'll actually pull open the options panel so that you can see this. So basically, we finally have a twin stick option. Now, this option is going to behave differently based on which platform you're on. The WMR controllers and the index controllers have a dedicated joystick in addition to their primary 2-axis output. So in those controllers, the moment you switch over to twin stick, the joysticks will just move you around. For Vive controllers and touch controllers, sadly, there's only one 2-axis input, so this mode will function similarly to the joystick/touchpad Locomotion, where we use the menu button to toggle on and on those hands. So when those arrows are off, all of my touchpad input is routed to, say, picking up objects or actuating them, but when they're on, I now have forward, back, left, right, and snap turn. And remember, if 45 degrees is more snap turn than you want, you can always go over to the global movement options and change it to a smaller increment. Also was added for Rift users who do not want the A and X buttons to be dedicated snap turn buttons because you're mapping them to something else or what have you. Right there, you can disable that. Wonderful. But yeah, with twin stick going here, we can just back on up, and such, and just stride forward slowly. Obviously, never do that into a brick wall you're in front of, unless you want to catch some nasty ricochets. But there you have it. That is our new toy. That's our new Locomotion options. Let's jump over to another scene to talk about the other thing that has been added in this update. So, we are now over in our Take and Hold lobby scene, and we've got some new features. The first of which is that we have the first set of characters that we can play as in Take and Hold. Now, you might ask, what exactly is a character? Basically, it's a starting set of equipment. It's the way the object tables function in the game, and eventually there'll also be a whole bunch of variation in the progression, meaning the specific challenges that you're fighting. The daring defaults here all use the standard progression, so it's the same types of targets, the same types of enemies, but just different equipment play. So, classic loadout Lewis is what you've all been playing. On-site procurement Patrice starts with just a tactical knife and no override tokens, so you have to completely utilize what you find in the environment. It's a fantastic challenge. There is Ricky Dicky Random, who starts with a completely random weapon, and the object tables that Ricky draws from are super random, super messed up. Everything always costs 3 tokens. I think a lot of folks are going to enjoy playing on this one. There's melee mode Maurice, which starts with a random melee weapon and a shield, and doesn't get guns in the object constructor pools. And Akimbo Pistol Parker, who starts with 2 pistols, and all of the sort of weapon pools for the object constructor are limited to pistols. In addition to this, now that this is online, and now that the rest of our options are online, including the fact that we have either a 5-hold run that then ends, or endless mode, we also have a scoring chart, which obviously this one's blank. The reason it's blank is that this table, as you can see here, is generated from the level, the character, the progression type, the spawn locking mode, and the health mode, so that you're competing against people with roughly identical settings. Let's see if I can even find one. Oh, there we go. There we have one for this character combo. We've got some scores down. Fantastic. So there you have it. I hope you all enjoy this. I'll be adding more stuff to Take and Hold basically slowly as I work on other things. I've got another like 20 or so characters planned. I want to vary up the progressions and things like that, but this should be more than enough to keep you folks happy and occupied for a while, and I can't wait to compete with y'all on the high score tables. Cool. Let's jump back out of this scene now, jump over the proving ground, and talk about the index controllers, and actually swap them out. So, we are back in the proving ground now, and as you can see, I have got some index controllers on. I'm actually using the front-facing cameras as well, so hopefully this comes out well in the recording. I wanted to do this so that you can actually see my fingers move as I demonstrate various things. Now, just very quickly to catch any of you up on, if you don't know what the index controllers have input-wise, the grip, instead of being a button, is an array of capacitive sensors and a force sensor. So basically, this controller can detect how far away these 3 of my fingers are independently, and it can sense me not just engage on it in a squeeze, but actually have a bunch of force variation. Now in H3, I'm not implementing hands in the game, and part of that has to do with the fact that this is a 3.5-year-old game with like 1,000 interactive objects sitting atop a system that would have to be far too modified to do that. And secondly, because of the fact that H3 can be very challenging and can require very, very precise manipulation, I figured the smartest way as a designer for me to start would be to essentially replicate the quote-unquote button event reliability that exists on the other controllers with these, and see what these controllers can bring to that modality. So, these are using what I call a hybrid grip, and I'm going to demonstrate this here with this gun, which is that with my hand completely open, hopefully the camera can see this well, if I reach down and I grab with these fingers and squeeze the controller, I initiate a grab. Obviously, if I then open my hand, it drops. I can, however, also initiate the grab with the trigger, like so, and then release it. Or I can initiate the grab with the trigger, transfer that grip over to these fingers, and then release the trigger, or do the opposite. Start with the hand, transfer to the trigger. Obviously dangerous with a firearm, because as you can see, I've also pulled the trigger back here. And then transfer it, and then release with a trigger drop. Now, I've done this for a number of reasons. The first, but probably I'd say the primary one, is that roughly 50% of VR users are used to grabbing things primarily with triggers, because grip buttons on Vive and WMR stink. 50% of VR users are used to grabbing with their middle fingers on touch controllers. So I wanted to create an input mapping where both categories of player would come in and they would do the instinctual thing that they've effectively trained themselves to do for like 1 to 3 years, and it would just work. The second reason has to do with how we are thinking about and handling throwing. This is the other challenge when you have a more complex input like this, in that what we want to do is make sure that we have a grab where, even though I am pressing this force sensor to initiate this grab, I don't want to have to keep that force on this to hold this. I want to be able to relax my hand slightly, which is what I can do here. Like so, that's how much I'd squeeze to grab it. And as you can see there, notice how far I can bring. Okay, there we go. When I stop touching the controller, it finally drops it. But this allows you to have a slightly more relaxed grip, which is important in a game like H3, where we might be holding the same rifle for like 15 minutes to an hour. So yeah. So in addition to that, when it comes to throwing, we can go about throwing a number of different ways. We can do it either, once again, just with those fingers, and then when we throw, let's actually come up here so we've got a little more clearance to throw. We can just release these fingers, like so, get a nice clean underhand. We can grab entirely with the trigger, keeping the rest of the hand open, as though we were like a Vive user. Fling it like so. Or we can just grab it with, especially for like panicking in combat, we can literally just squeeze with all of our fingers, pull that out, and still, as long as we open our whole hand very rapidly, still throw as normal. So yeah, that's the entire concept behind this implementation of grabbing, is trying to support as many sort of simultaneous expected ways of utilizing the controller as possible. Oh, I love throwing with these. The other thing too that's great about it is, and this is one of the ways that this differs from other controllers, is that especially when you're in combat, you tend to do what's called panic clutch, which is that even when you want to start another interaction, but you're tense because you're fighting something, so you're squeezing the controller as hard as you can because you're freaking out and you're tense. I want to make sure that a user, while still panic clutching like this, can still at least initiate an interaction. So you can, with an empty hand, have this clutched still and still come over an interaction and pull the trigger to initiate that interaction. Let me make sure that was on the controllers. So already clutching, freaking out, Sosig's attacking me, pull the trigger. I have this in my hand now. So there you have it. Oh, safety. Wonderful. Haha, love it. So there you go. So that is my implementation of the way this works. And obviously, I'm an arm swinger right now, which means I'm touching these two buttons. It's still my favorite mode, even with these, because it's so low cognitive overhead. It's only one button per hand at most. But the sticks also allow me to snap turn while still being in arm swinger. Awesome. So let's go ahead and jump out now and talk about the controllers in greater depth and a couple other things that have been added in this update. Yo! So out of VR now, so let's talk a little more about the controller itself. This is pretty much the final form. This is still a unit of DVs, meaning that they're not the exact same model that is shipping, but they're pretty much the same. So, just a quick cursory review again of all of the input for those who don't know. We have, as I mentioned, the sort of the grip and force sensor that I talked about before, a trigger. We have a joystick to the side here with a functional click and a sort of pill-shaped touchpad, and I think what a lot of people don't know is that this is still a fully featured 2-axis touchpad. One of the things that I was really worried about when I played with the first version of these, like well over, a year ago, was that I was afraid that because H3 has a lot of precise 2-axis interactions, like slide releases, clicking on the left side of the touchpad and then dragging down slightly, or dragging up to hold the slide release up, that would not function on these. And it works shockingly well. I don't know if it's because of this little ridge that exists, but it makes really fantastic capacitive contact even when your finger is like that. You don't have to like stay completely on the pad for it to register and work. So I'm super happy with it. And it's a force sensor too. So if you want to implement anything in your various games that has you just like whole hand just squeezing something till it pops, you can do that. And I'm sure I'm going to come up with a couple hilarious ways to use that. Also, a couple practical ways. I'm really curious about, like, say, actually having a functional grip safety on something like a 1911, or what else would have one? P7M8 maybe. But yeah, as well as just like making things. I love to make it with the power-ups, just being able to like explode them in your hand to use them. Although that might trigger accidentally. Anyway, in addition to that, we have a full A, B face button and then the system button there, which makes this the most, input rich of all the VR controllers, which of course is great for me because, like, I'll be frank, if there were 5 more buttons on this controller, I'd find a way to use them, whether or not that would be a good idea. So yeah, and then in terms of adjustability, how you get them on and off, there's this little squeezy thing here for you to cinch this in either direction, and then to get the posture of the controller on your hand how you want, you basically press this in and then rotate it up and then let it snap back out. And there's sort of 4 settings. My understanding is that for people with, I think it's smaller hands, might want to have it more out wide. Either way, my personal, just for comfort, I like it up there, just because my fingers are a little long. And then you just go like that to cinch it on there, and it is on there. I think I did this once on my stream, but I get a lot of questions about, like, well, does it really help with throwing that much if you still have a controller in your hand, you don't want to throw it across the room? So I'm going to do I'm going to show you how much I trust them, because this is like a $1,000 monitor I'm right in front of, which is that once you get these cinched on your hands, full open, so as you can see, control still wiggles a little bit, but it mostly settles exactly back to where its hand is. And I've been chucking grenades and throwing knives and things like that for the past couple weeks, and they've never come off my hands. So unless you're like dipping your hands in bacon fat before putting these on, I think you're probably good. So yeah, so that is the index controllers. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I have neglected to mention. Oh, very important, because I know this is, I see a lot of discussion of folks' concern about, like, well, how supported are they going to be by various developers, at least at a sort of baseline level. And the nice thing is, let's take the pathological case, which is like, you have a VR game that you like, that is on Steam, and the developer has disappeared, has been abducted by aliens. They are never updating that application again. The cool thing is that because of the Steam VR input system, there's something called a legacy binding that they set up by default, but that you can essentially make a copy of and then rebind the game. And it includes a whole bunch of smart ways to handle this sensor combination. So it can either be just based on capacitance, it can be based on force, or it can be based on a mix of them. They've come up with their own sort of grab mode. So there's a ton of options if you're willing to, like, just jump into the binding or see, and you can post those bindings to, I think, the Steam workshop for the game. But either way, what it means is that even stuff that's like older in the catalog and isn't going to get any more love, there are ways to set it up to make it work well with these controllers. And the developer, even if they don't want to push another build of the game, can jump in, configure their own binding, and still upload it and set it as the default legacy binding for their game without having to update their game. So that is freaking great as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, the only downside, honestly, is that I have a lot of muscle memory to relearn. For 3.5 years, I've been grabbing everything with the trigger, and so thankfully with the hybrid grip, it's been a lot easier. Before, when I was just trying to do it like this and ignoring the trigger, it was way too much behavior to override. And I still, as someone coming over from Vive, still make like 80 to 90% of my grabs with the trigger instead of here. But I'm slowly sort of reteaching myself to think about the center of my hand as where grabs initiate. So yeah, so what this means is that with update 72, the full support for these controllers is now in. So in fact, it's all of the new input and binding stuff is in. So if you're one of those lucky folk that got these early, jump in and try H3. Should just auto detect them correctly. One thing to be aware with binding stuff is that if you are a WMR user who custom rebound H3 because you wanted to use your joysticks or something like that, you're going to have to revert to my default binding again, or everything, or none of your buttons are going to work. So fair warning on that. Whew, so that just about does it for that stuff. Oh, very importantly, and this was provoked by the migration over to the Steam VR input system to support these controllers, is I have rewritten haptics as well. They should be punchier now, a little more interesting, and I've set myself up a framework for adding some haptics to other interactions going forward. So that should be improved. Just be aware, I think at the moment SteamVR is in this transition of migrating from a deprecated to a non-deprecated API connection for Oculus controllers. So if Oculus users, if the haptics are super weird or busted, let me know. Try the beta version of SteamVR before you let me know, though, on the forums, because that fixed things for at least one user. I don't fully know what's going on, but cross API shenanigans. Cool, and that, let me double check my list. We talked about that, we talked about the input, we talked about the haptics, scoring. Oh yeah, I made like the encryption target warp in a little less prominent in take and hold. I fixed a bunch of things involving melee damage. I reverted the lighting on the friendly 45 range to what it originally was. I had messed something up in the color correction profile, so I'm sorry that lingered that way for so long. I just somehow never noticed. Wonderful. Oh, and I fixed the music in Take and Hold will now actually go to the higher intensity version of the track like it was supposed to. Fix that bug. All right, enough rambling from Anton about the game and about controllers and such. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. This update, this is a big one. There's so many code changes, and while I've tried to test it as best as possible leading up to this, I ask your patience if anything is sort of glitchy, or if one of the many locomotion modes is busted in some way. With 4 platforms and 7 locomotion modes, that's 28 permutations that I always have to test, which means it's very easy for something to sneak through. So as always, post bugs in the bug report section of the Steam forum, and I will get to them as fast as I am able. Anywho, hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Peace.